I'd like to welcome you to this month's Strive Learning Lab. For those of you who join us regularly, you may have heard the presentation of the Samata trial results on the 25th of April, which was presented by Ravi Prakash and Tara Beatty. If you didn't hear that, that's available on our website that you can go and hear. Today's presentation is drawing on the qualitative data from that same trial. The title is Gender Norms and Poverty versus Educational Aspirations and Individual Resilience. What is the contribution of Samata? And today's presenters are going to be Satya Ramanaik from the KHPT, the Karnataka Health Programs Trust in Karnataka in India, and Martine Colombian from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. So I'm sure many of you are aware of the role of Strive. We're a research consortium funded by DFID to tackle the structural drivers of HIV. We work with partners in India, Tanzania, South Africa, the US and the UK, and focus on conducting research around a range of structural drivers. I'm Mitzi Gaffos, one of the co-research directors of Strive, and I have the pleasure of chairing today's session. What we will do today is Satya and Martine will do the presentation between them, switching between the two. And at the end of that, after about 30 minutes, we'll have the opportunity for questions and a broader discussion. So please hold all of your questions to then.
So you've mentioned the title, so I'll go ahead immediately with what we will be covering. In this webinar, we will explore what did change in the lives of girls participating in Samata. As we know from Ravi and Tara's presentation, the Samata trial didn't show an impact. We'll be exploring why that is so. And also, we have an exciting story to tell about mobility restrictions. And so we're going to take you through why girls in the intervention area had fewer restrictions imposed on their mobility. So the overall goal of the trial, the Samata trial, just to remind everyone, from the original theory of change, the goal was to improve the quality of life of adolescent girls from vulnerable and marginalized communities in Bijapur and Bagalkot districts of northern Karnataka. It aims to do so by supporting entry into and retention in secondary education and by delaying age at marriage and entry into sex work. So how we measured success in the RCT was by two primary outcomes, which were the percentage of girls who complete secondary education, which means that they sat the 10th standard exam, and the percentage of girls who were married by the end line, and this is at age 15 to 16. So, a little bit more about the reach. The project period was from 2013 to 17. The Samata was implemented by KHPT in 2 districts. These districts have mainly rural areas with a high proportion of scheduled caste and scheduled tribes populations. So we covered 3,600 girls in 1,800 families, with a total of 119 villages and 190 schools. We also did an intervention with boys. Now, the logic, the theory of change, what we thought we needed to do was to reduce gender inequitable norms in adolescent girls and boys, building the girl's sense of agency, confidence, self-esteem, etc., and improving her academic performance in school. With the family, we had to develop appreciation of the value of girls' education and reducing the family's economic dependence on girls' labor. As well as in school, we needed to strengthen the school's capacities to be responsive to girls' needs and supportive of their success. And in combination, this would reduce the dropout of girls from school and delay their marriage. So in terms of intervention strategies, this is clearly a multi-level intervention. The main target group, audience group, are the girls, mainly strategies related to their schooling, so facilitating access to scholarships and schemes, tuition classes, career counseling, and so on, but also group reflection sessions that were held in villages, and the formation of community advisory boards where girls would be on. There was also a smaller component with boys, which was basically also reflection groups which were held in the villages. And for boys, this included sports as well. And we had tournaments and boys champions that were being encouraged. Now there was also an important component with the families in the community, so family outreach. There was an outreach worker who went to see the parents and also linked them to social entitlements. There were parents' meetings and so on. And then specifically for schools, that was basically training and gender sensitization of teachers and the school development and management committee members. So I'm going to hand over to Satya to talk about the qualitative study objective.
Thank you, Martin. The qualitative study objectives are embedded within the larger plus randomized control trial. We followed 36 girls prospectively to map the changes in the individual and family context for a time and providing detailed accounts of key events that affects the girls' schooling, and also to identify common problems faced by girls and how the intervention could or could not provide support, compare how girls overcome challenge differently in interventions area from those in the control area. A prospective case study designed with 36 girls. We sampled from the line list for the baseline survey. We recruited 10 girls from the control villages, and there are about 26 girls from the intervention villages. We interviewed the girls 3 times with the help of a participatory tool. The participatory tool was very helpful here, considering the girls were quite young at that time. They were about 13 to 14, and they were shy and not socialized to speak out. So all interviews were transcribed and translated into English. We used NVO for the data coding and the management. And we also used a spreadsheet not to lose track from the context of each individual case across the 3 rounds. We used thematic narrative analysis here. So this is an example of a participatory tool. The first one is a lifeline tool we used at the start of each interview to plot important events that happened in the past year or since the last interview. It served both an icebreaker and warm-up and for an easy reference during the interview to ensure all major events as absence from school, family functions, marriage proposal, wedding in the family, or to close friends was recorded and discussed. And the second one is we used a family tree in the second round of interview as we felt we had been missing important information about their family context. And the third example is the ladder of life, which we used in the last interview, asking girls to position themselves on the ladder in terms of how they relate their self-esteem, expanding why they pursued themselves there. I also want to clarify the timeline of field work. We recruited girls from the first RCT cohort, those who started in 8th standard in 2013. They were interviewed at the end of 8th standard before intervention started. The second lifeline case study interview happened in 2015 as the girls entered 10th standard, and the last interview happened a year after finishing 10th standard. This is unlike the end survey that was done just after they had done 10th standard. So these are all some of the themes we use for the final analysis. Some of these themes followed from our intervention guide, while others emerged from the ongoing analysis process. We did probe for the intervention exposure at the time of the data collection, but only towards the end of the interviews, so that we could see how important girls consider the intervention spontaneously among various other factors. that influence retention in school. So next I would request Marty to share some key findings from the study.
Thank you, Satya. So what did we learn about dropout from school? So dropout was not a one-off event, but rather a process resulting from strong social norms at community level, interacting with household-level deprivation. This together influenced relationships at home, at school, and on the way to school. So three important interrelated gender norms constrain girls' agency and likelihood of school dropout. They relate to protecting girls' sexual purity by limiting freedom from beyond the home, so actually freedom to move in public spaces. Then their domestic role in household and caring duties, and also the lower priority given to their education compared to that of boys. So following the second round of interviews, we analyzed what was different for those girls who had dropped out, and we had 6 of them, with 2 other groups. Those who attended school regularly, 20 of them, and those who are frequently absent. We've seen that missing school often preceded dropout. So parents' aspirations are definitely key. The value placed on education by parents clearly differentiated the regular school goings from the others. So where parents actively encourage girls' educational and career aspirations, family dynamics were characterized by open communication between parents and children, and cooperation allowing girls to better balance schoolwork with domestic chores. So this fostered the girls' agency to communicate not only at home, but importantly at school too. So both parents and daughters could resist pressures of social sanctions and pay less attention to what other people in the community do and what others expect from them or their daughters. So in contrast, where educational aspirations were weak, parents invested more intensely in enforcing correct performance of gender, prioritizing her well-being by aiming to secure her future in a good marriage. This coincided with poorer families. So girls' domestic duties came at the cost of schooling, with concerns about protecting her sexual purity predominating. So poverty clearly exacerbates the impact of discriminatory gender practices, and it also increases the likelihood of parental conflict and alcohol abuse in the girls' homes. So I think we can now summarize why we think Samata trial showed flat results. So the cumulative effect of the many efforts by both government and NGOs resulted in a secular trend that surpassed the primary objectives we had set for the trial. Also, the dropout seemed more likely towards the start of secondary education, and the intervention started late in that first cohort that we sampled from. So it started at the start of ninth standard. We had expected to see a few more girls drop out to follow after the second round of data collection amongst those who had missed school frequently, so those 10 girls who were poor attenders. Yet, when we came to the end line, all set the exam, though only one has now progressed to being in college at the time of the third interview. So what about marriage? Marriage was a process as well, with a delay in the second step of Gorna. So Gorna is when the girl moves to her husband and her in-laws house, and when actually sexual activity begins. So first girl stayed living with her parents, and during this period, it was possible that she continued education. However, parents' concerns regarding safeguarding her sexual purity were reinforced after marriage, and can only be gone once Gorna was performed. as then she is no longer under their care. So there are important reputational fears, and in these cases, the deciding factor for dropout was reputation and was directly associated with early marriage. So with heavier restrictions and no education, there's little scope for these girls to develop their agency. So overall, we also searched to see whether we could explain the flat result by a reaction among some part of the population against the intervention, but we didn't find any evidence of that. So before I hand over to Satya, who will report on the analysis of all three ways, I show you this little schema where we analyzed the data in three groups. So amongst the control girls, those who were not exposed to the intervention because they were in the control areas, we saw the importance of educational aspirations of the parents reiterated. Then amongst the girls in the intervention area, we did observe changes in narratives amongst 18 girls. These were the girls whose parents had positive attitudes towards the program, and hence the exposure of their daughters was more intense. There were also those girls who had minimal exposure, either because they dropped out early or simply because the parents weren't interested. So over to Satya.
Thank you, Martin. So although there was no effect on primary outcomes, we do have other outcomes to report that we clearly trace back to the intervention. So now I will be reporting on what changed in the lives of the girls who engaged in Samata intervention in contrast to those in the intervention area who did not engage and those in the control area. So at endline, girls reported far fewer restrictions on mobility, and this is a big change from baseline. There are two quotes here from a girl called Shanti. So Shanti said in the baseline, now they say you become Dodaki. Dodaki means you attend a puberty, don't wander here and there. They restrict me to play with boys. If I speak to some, they say, don't stand and speak like that. You are not a small. So they scold if I wear short dresses, a lot of restrictions, and I feel bad about it. Shanti, age 13 at the time of baseline. The same Shanti, we interviewed in the end line, she said, I can go everywhere. I can go to college, temple, panchayat, library, etc. I don't have any restrictions. If we trust ourselves and our parents trust us, then we can go right. Now I am allowed to go any place and I feel confident. There is no restriction for me to go out. So we had quite a few of these comparisons among those intensely exposed to intervention in contrast to others. So the next question is, why did parents grant more freedom to girls? Parents had clearly developed a trust in their daughter's ability to remain safe, and it was the girls who earned that trust. In response to the interviewer asking, do you feel comfortable to talk to boys? Your family members don't say anything. The response was, I am confident to talk to boys. And parents don't say anything. They think of them as a brother. So we talk to them, isn't it? Which was clearly not the case before. Again, in response to the interviewer asking, how did this change? What happened? Another girl replied, earlier our parents think that we are not strong. We were young and not confident enough. So they felt like that and they did not allow us to talk. Now they think my daughter is smart and parents feel confident about us. They trust us, they allow us to talk. What contributed to improved parent-child relationship? Girls' positive attitude, self-confidence, and negotiation skills at home resulted in a better relationship with parents. There seems little doubt that the route to greater trust is through more open communication with parents. These quotes illustrate this. I share all my feelings, emotions, good and bad with them. If there are any problems, if I am sad, then I share it with them. I can get parents' support only if I share with them. They listen and care about my concerns. Rupa about age 17 from the end line. Other strategy and coping skills that girls used are that they found a good balance between managing household chores and focusing on studies. In other words, they did not neglect either of these. Girls adopted a questioning attitude in everything. They did not give up at first attempt. This is where we observe increased resilience as defined as the ability to bounce back from a negative experiences with a competent functioning. This is how they handled the challenges beyond home. So what did girls attribute change to? Girls in their narratives kept referring to the Parivartan session where they had gained awareness and developed aspiration and confidence, self-esteem and pride. Reflection on gender brought the critical thinking and and equality between boys, which were messages the girls took home. It was also a space where they could discuss sensitive topics as menstrual hygiene and reproductive issues, and where they gained knowledge on laws and protect women's rights. Girls stated the importance of the outreach worker coming to see their parents and reinforcing the Samata messages. This is a crucial support role as it helps parents change the perspective. They also mentioned about the Samvada. Gave girls a chance to speak out, and brothers and boys in the community also more supportive. Parivartan Place was focused on a life skill education. As Martin mentioned earlier, the Parivartan sessions were conducted at the village level, and it was focused mainly on the life skill education among young girls, and this session is similar to the one developed by ICRW for the STRIVE project in Mumbai. Though it's considering the rural context here, we have not included the sports component here, but it was conducted in the village setting. The key objective of the module include creating awareness on their strengths and weaknesses, building self-esteem and confidence, develop assertiveness, communication, conflict resolution skills, help them to express their opinion, fear, and aspirations openly. The sessions were conducted in a village setting where girls feel comfortable and safe to spend some quality hours with the team. The sessions were facilitated by female outreach worker of the Samata program. So these are all some of the girls' voice. The girls said about how Parivartan Plus program has helped them. The first quotation, we learned a lot from Parivartan. We should study further. That kind of aspiration is there, and child marriage should not happen. That thinking is there, and there should be no discrimination between boys and girls. There should be courage for girls to talk, and now I have that. One of the respondents, and similarly, the other girl said about the aspiration, how the aspiration have been changed. After I complete my second year PUC, I'll do a bachelor in commerce. Then after completing that, I'll apply for a bank job. Similarly, other girls said earlier, all the girls used to be little silent. They were not so quick and smart. Now you all, Samata team came and tell us who we should and all, what we should do and how we should behave and all. Girls have become stronger now. Boys have quieted down. So what changed in terms of marriage? Girls report a strong desire for their parents to consult them before deciding on their marriages. So one of the respondents said, earlier when my parents talk about my marriage, I was scared. I don't say anything. I used to keep quiet. But now after joining Parivartan Place, I have got that confidence. So I talk to them. I tell them I will study further, don't perform my marriage so soon. I have the confidence to ask why. So this is a respondent Purvika said in the end line. Better knowledge and implications of early marriages has led to views on age at marriage increased from 18 to 20 plus. Girls expressed partner preference in line with the gender equality principles. So I request Martin to proceed with the next few slides.
Great, thank you, Satya. So I want to present some closing results on those with less or no exposure. And it's really essential that we see these two groups differently. So let's start with the girls in the intervention area who received little exposure. So amongst them, nobody started a college education. and 2 out of the 8, because there was 8 in this group, sat the 10th standard exam. 4 were married and 1 engaged. So these were families with complex backgrounds. Some had abusive relationships, there was alcohol addiction, there was debt, and this also coincided with the parents holding the most rigid gender perceptions. These are not ready for change. So amongst the control girls, actually everyone, all but 1 girl, continued with college education. However, what's clear is there was no change in mobility restrictions because the public space was not considered safe and parents had no confidence in girls' ability to handle potential harassment. So in neither of these 2 groups did girls report on having achieved something through their own negotiation skills. And when we did the exercise with the ladder of self-esteem, they scored themselves lower. So the girls in the intervention area, or reached by the intervention, clearly had higher self-esteem and felt they achieved. They explained they were on the upper rungs of the ladder, and they attributed that to the intervention. So what did we learn about gender norms? So clearly, the norm change in girls' education was well underway. With educational aspirations, there is flexibility around gender roles at home. Domestic and caring duties do not come at the cost of education. So through building resilience, or in other words, empowering girls, in our case, this translated in more open and trusting relationships with the parents, so that Samata has relaxed mobility restrictions and given girls more freedom to move around in the community, which is really the main contribution we feel from these qualitative data that Samata has given the girls who engaged with the interventions. However, this is only amongst those ready for change, and I think this is really an important message. Some families were not ready to change. It wasn't that the outreach workers didn't try. In the interviews of the girls who weren't reached, it was clear that the outreach workers tried very hard, but the parents weren't responsive. So what are the implications for intervention and research? So in a way, this out-of-school gender reflection and life skills building for young people has been very promising. And so we kind of, as NGOs or civil society, we need to support government with the in-school staff, but concentrate on what can be done in the villages. So in terms of research, in retrospect, we would measure impact differently. We would look at completing 12th standard and postponing marriage beyond 18, and also measure the freedom of girls to move in the community. And then again, based on the intervention, it's work with those ready to change, because it seems that norm change follows that. It goes in phases, and there is enough people who are ready for change, and this is where you're going to have extra mileage here in terms of giving girls freedom to move around the community. Okay, so rest me to acknowledge the girls, the family members, school staff, all those participating and in the research and providing valuable information. We also want to acknowledge KHPT staff for providing logistical support and the field investigators. Last but not least, the STRIVE Consortium and the school for NDFID and the funders and all those who supported us financially. And so I would say thank you and open for questions.
Thank you, Martine and Satya, for a great overview in this presentation. That was really very useful and very insightful. Thank you. So please send any questions through. I've got one question typed in to start off with, which I think you touched on. So this question was asked earlier on in the presentation, and then I think, Martine, some of your slides spoke to this, but maybe you'd like to add a bit more to it. The question is, was the intervention able to affect shifts in aspirations within the families involved with the qualitative research? And as I say, you've spoken to that quite a bit, so maybe the issue is really what do you know about the role of shifting in the family and that influencing for the girls?
We have sort of, apart from what we said, that the parents really changed, that relationship between girls and parents changed. There was also quotes that showed that their relationship with their brothers changed, and the brothers were more supportive of them as well. And it was sort of certainly what the girls brought home in terms of skill building and negotiation power and all those things. Sort of that issue of open communication seemed to have affected everyone everyone. I'll say parents and brothers. So I don't know about the grandparents. We didn't see, I don't know of any data there. I don't know whether you would agree, Satya?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Thank you. We've got another question that's come in from Ben. You mentioned that some families were not ready to change, no matter how hard you tried. I've got two questions related to this. Did you notice any common characteristics in those families, such as demographics or other? And the second question, even though they did not change, to what extent did their description of the context change? Were they acknowledging the change happening around them? I'm asking because that might have implications for change in the long term.
Those families who were not ready for change were really the poorer families. I mean, sort of those who, there were cases where the mother had died. There were cases where it really was more difficult backgrounds within the...
Yeah.
Satya, do you want to respond more?
Yeah, Martin. As Martin mentioned, these families, these families are have a kind of structural problems. Like most of these families, they mentioned, like either father is alcoholic, he's not supporting to the family. Like these families are worrying more about their own other issues. There is a conflict between the spouse, husband and wife always fight, and there is no the healthy environment for the children to express their views. So this kind of father comes with alcoholic and then he beats wife. So these kind of characteristics we found among those the girls who are not responding. Like here, Outishoker tried many a times, like the first round, second round, third round. They visited quite a many number of times, but the parents never turned up. They are not ready to listen the importance of education, girls' education kind of things, because they need to deal with so many other their own life-related difficulties they are facing. So they are least bothered about this kind of thing. I think these families may need a kind of longer time intervention, or a very different approach to handle their family level issues first, and then addressing the child schooling related issues maybe.
Thank you. And to the second part of that question, so even though the families weren't ready for change themselves, was there any sense within the data that they were acknowledging the change that was going on around them? I think the question is really, so these families weren't ready for change, but in any of the data you collected, was it clear that they were seeing that there was a change in norms and a change in attitudes to education going on around them, or were they just really ignoring the change that you've described that was going on in the broader society?
I think those girls who responded very well to the intervention, I think we can see a kind of some level of norm change among these girls at the first level, I feel. Like the norm change is happening mainly at the girls' level first, and then the girls communicating these things with the parents is a kind of ice break. Like the parents who are simply following some of those norms. For example, the girl should not go to the school, or girls should not move outside the home. That's simply following those kind of norms without questioning. Like nobody was questioned these parents actually. When the girls started questioning these things, the parents started had difficult to answer these questions, and they started realizing like why I'm restricting my daughter. I think that was the crux of the whole issue. Like the parent-child communication kind of really a kind of start for the kind of norm change process, I feel. That's what's coming out from the data.
Mm-hmm. Also, I think, Satya, would it be true to say that those girls, as they were not as verbal, they were not, their narratives weren't as fluent, and I don't know whether the question was asked, do you feel that the other girls in your village have changed? Now some of them were at home at that time because they weren't in school anymore. So that there is really, it's difficult to say from the girls' data, I think, but my instinct, without having looked very deep into this issue, I would think there isn't much evidence. And I think if there is one thing kind of I regret is that we don't have qualitative data from the parents that would give us sort of more insight into this and in other things, and especially those parents who weren't open to the intervention.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So another question here from Ravi. The results suggest norms change in girls' education is well underway. Whether these norm changes are happening at the girls' level, do you have anything to suggest whether these norms changes are happening at the girls' level, family level, or at both levels? And what is the direction of change among family and the girls that you see within the qual data?
Okay, so there I would say what we saw in the most important factors, or the most important factors that we see both in control and intervention, is the aspiration of the parents for better education for their daughters. Mm-hmm. So I would say that apart from the intervention, for those not integrators, for the secular trend, it definitely goes, I think, from parents to girls, because that is where the girls get their values from and so on. At this age, at young age, it definitely comes from the parents, and it's all about they encourage their girls to study and so on, and then it will be sort of reciprocal. I think in the intervention, it's then a push from the intervention towards parents, and that's where the input comes from the girls, where she gains trust, and where she gains trust at home because the parents witness how she can negotiate. It's through their improved interactions, through their improved relationship or understanding that she gets more freedom.
Great, thank you. I have another question here for Martine and Satya. I'm interested in the role of the community outreach workers. Does your data shine any light on differences between outreach workers as well as the way girls and families viewed them?
I think the outreach worker is the very key in the whole intervention. Their role in the intervention is very, very much important. And the data, since it is a longitudinal data, we can see that how the girls talked about the outreach worker in the midline and at the time of end line. We can see that in the midline, many girls said about they were comparing even in the end line also. Like earlier, outreach worker used to come and we didn't have a kind of trust on them, and families was not trusting them. But at the later stage, once they started building a rapport with the girls, and once the trust improved, they played a very important role. Even some girls mentioned that some of the outreach workers become a kind of role model for them. Actually, they like the way they talk, the way they present, the way they take the session. So those things, and also most of these, the outreach worker also from the rural background, they were like taking them as a role model, coming from rural background, studying, and then like giving all this information. So I think the outreach worker, the girls talked a lot about the outreach worker role, and especially helping them when they face difficult time with their family members, counseling the family, and those kind of issues.
Okay, thank you. So I've got a question for you both, which is more about the methodologies that you use. So I'm interested in knowing what your experience was of the participatory processes, the sort of aspirational ladder and the mapping exercises, and what you felt were some of the pros and cons of using those within the context of this study.
So, considering the typical village background and like the context, I think we really had a tough time at the baseline, but especially at the initial stage, girls they're not ready to open up actually. So that was the main intention, to introduce many different tools here. It is not just like a typical in-depth interview kind of thing we use here. We used the Lifeline case study that was very helpful in spotting, like taking back to the girls to a specific event, like what was happened at that time, at that month, and what was the situation, how she was reacted, what was the challenge she faced. So we tried to help the girls to point out in that way using the Lifeline case study approach. And similarly, at the end line time, we used the ladder of life, like to understand the girl's self-esteem. So basically here, like throwing a direct question and asking something is very difficult with these girls in this background actually. So that's the reason we tried many participatory tools that was very useful in capturing a very rich data in this study.
Mm. And were there any disadvantages? Are they tools that were particularly difficult to analyse for this study?
I think one thing we can say is that we've actually learned a lot from it. The first time, the Lifeline tool didn't actually work as well, because it was partly because the interviewers weren't as proficient. We had much better results in the second round. In the first round, sort of there wasn't enough probing around it, but it's also difficult to know. You know, there were 13-year-old girls in India. They're so socialized not to speak out. So I personally can't see disadvantages of using these tools. You just simply can't get a word out without them. So they were actually quite an important part of it. But we've learned a lot, and we used it differently in the second and third round. There was a lot in the first round. There was a lot about, and then I felt happy because there was this festival, and then the other month there was this that happened. So we actually went through a learning process of how to use these tools. Which is not to say that the next time we do it with the very young ones, that it will go, you know, they would be very chatty, but definitely we would do it differently if we start we would do the improvement from the first round, if you see what I mean.
Mm. Yeah. Okay. So I was also interested, you talked about interviewing 36 girls overall, and I was wondering, I don't think, unless I missed it, I don't think you mentioned how many times you were able to repeat interview them over the 3 rounds. So I'm interested to know how difficult it was actually to engage the girls in multiple rounds of qualitative interviews.
I think the refusal rate is pretty low here in this context. But like there are some challenges, especially those girls who left the school early. Those we had a tough time to trace them back for the midline and endline, because some of them, like I think there are about 4 girls who left early and then they moved to their in-laws house. So we just wait for them to come back. Like we conducted interviews only in their native place actually. So we waited for them to come back. Some turned back and some not turned back. There was one girl whose parent was not ready to consenting. Like he was not happy with his daughter to interview. So we had a tough time to, like we had not interviewed that girl actually. So other than that, we have a team for the qualitative study, especially from the baseline to midline. Like we have a regular team, like those who interviewed these girls in the mid baseline, the same team, the same research team interviewed in the midline, and then even though there is a team change, but like there is a very good transition. Like the old team introduced all these girls to the new team, and then we continued. So that's the reason we had a very good rapport with all these girls in the over a period of time. So that's the reason that the refusal rate is comparatively very less.
That's great. Thank you. So another question typed in here. I encourage other people to type in their questions and send them forward. So in the quantitative findings that were presented previously, we know that there was quite a significant difference that emerged between the 2 districts that you worked across. This question is asking whether you were able to see any difference in the 2 districts and whether you were able to compare them in any way and draw any conclusions from that.
No. We have such a small sample. We can't possibly do that. We can't possibly do that. Can I come back to something?
Sure.
And perhaps previous question that Ben asked us about how families perceive it, because something has come back to me. So I said we didn't really see negative impact of the intervention. We saw that some families weren't responsive. What we do have 2 references to was girls who were part of the intervention, and I think one of the girls was she was a CAB member, was saying like, I wasn't invited to the wedding, to the marriage of my friend, because we're seen as a KHBT family. So, and I don't think this has an effect in terms of them marrying their girls off sooner or something. It's just that they won't go along with the goals of the family. But I'd actually be interested in knowing, perhaps this is a question to Ben, in terms of sort of social norms where we see, everyone goes with, where we think of change of as long as we have a group moving and that group becomes bigger, and then we have sort of a social norm change. And whether there is at some point a danger of dividing the community, where we start stigmatizing girls who are married, and I think we kind of have to stay aware and cautious about being too moral about this. Do you see what I mean? I think this would be really interesting to get other people's view on.
Ben, are you on the line? Do you want to comment on any of that? Yes, he can hear. We can't hear you, Ben. So he's going to type. So he is saying, I think this is an important point. The issue of unintended consequences is a real one, and I think needs to be taken into serious consideration by NGO workers. I think that it varies also across practices. In the case of domestic violence, for example, I would prefer men to be ostracized because they hit their wife, rather than the wife being ostracized or stigmatized for being in a violent relationship. But in the case of traditional practices, such as child marriage, it gets more complicated and too long to type. but we can have further conversations on that. Yeah, and he's been having very similar conversations around that with other groups as well. So yeah, maybe that is a discussion that we can pick up a little bit more on. So maybe as a bit of a roundup question then, so for Satya and Martine, what are your next steps now in terms of analysing this data and any subsequent analysis from the qualitative data?
Satya, do you want to answer that?
Yeah. I think we have completed a kind of especially for the one primary paper from the qualitative study. We have completed kind of the first set of analysis, and we are in the process of writing part actually. So maybe that's our next step immediately, working on the paper. Like we started working on the paper, and we'll bring out that's the primary one. And maybe the other thing is comparing some of the qualitative findings, means kind of mixed method approach. Looking into the qualitative data and quantitative data together. That is maybe another area we can work further maybe.
Yeah, I agree with the mixed method. I actually don't know now whether we can measure increased mobility with the survey data, because that would obviously make a strong paper. I think we have norms around it, but that's far more complex. They may change in different direction in terms of the awareness of the norms and so on. But it's kind of the behaviors or the practices that the girls are allowed out, and I'm actually not sure whether we can measure that, whether we have a question on it. But anything that comes out of however we can substantiate our finding on increased mobility amongst these girls with the quantitative data, I think that would be an important next step.
Yeah. And the team, our team is also working on the boys' data to get a sense on understanding their perception change on the girls' education and marriage. So again, that's another piece, a very good piece of information, like how the change process happened among the boys, how their attitude and perception have been changed, because there was a very important intervention component with the boys also. So we started looking into the boys' data also.
Great. Well, we're coming to the top of the hour, so I want to thank Martine and Satya for a great presentation. We look forward to seeing, having the paper available to read on this, but also seeing the future data coming out. And for everybody on the line, this presentation will be available online very shortly, and all of our previous learning labs are available on our website, which has just been added to the slides, which hopefully you can all see, which you can go on to. And again, you can share those links for your colleagues to be able to listen to this presentation.